Hello.
Hello. Can you add your friend?
Oh, she's here.
Oh, say I
Aisha.
can see her.
Yes.
Can I add her or you can add?
I don't think I can add her.
Yeah, I
Oh,
just
wait.
agreed to have her.
Okay. Mm,
Hello, Aisha.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you both.
Oh, thank you so
thank
much.
you.
So how things are going? Can you introduce yourself, both of you, and then we will be able to introduce what we're gonna talk about today. So you both students, so I thought it will be a good idea to invite you to discuss the current situation in regard to COVID and how it impacts your studies in general.
Okay, so should I go? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Okay, so my name is T. I'm a student in my third year at the same university as Aisha, and I'm studying business economics. And we're also co-hosts of a podcast together called Ice Black. And we kind of talk about the student experience and just growing up in general, being in your 20s in this world, you know. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Aisha. I'm 21. T and I met through school, and I'm her co-host for Ice Black, and I'm a student too.
Okay, maybe it's gonna be great for both of you to introduce what you're doing outside of school, especially the podcast that you mentioned, because I think it's a good idea. And I listen, I guess all of them. So the topic were actually related to what we're living now. So it will be interesting for both of you to say what you're actually doing, not directly to cope with the situation, but just to occupy your life as a young adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, how things are going since the pandemic started?
Very chaotic. I mean,
It's a
Aisha
lot
and I
of
have been
uncertainty.
doing online school the whole time, basically, since COVID started. So I think that we don't really get to connect with our classmates at all. I mean, even worse
At
for
all?
her, yes, yeah. Even worse for her because she's outside of the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that great in terms of like actually us being excited to attend classes because there's not that human connection element. I think even the professors are kind of saddened by it, and some of my professors have talked about like how difficult it is to hold classes like this, and yeah, it's just not the best, I guess.
Mm. Can you both maybe explain to us when the pandemic started in regard of your studies? So because we don't know in which year you are and how it actually impacted your progression at school.
Okay. So me and T were in the same year, same semester. So when I left for my home country, I was still first year, second semester, and it was going into second year, first semester. So when I left Japan, I was still first semester, and I'm still here now. So
Mm-hmm.
going back to Japan, I'm going to be already a fourth year. And I guess at first I didn't think it was going to be hard. But
Okay.
after I started doing Zoom and stuff, I found that it was actually a lot harder than studying in like face to face.
In which regard it was especially harder?
I can consider myself a kinesthetic learner. Like I have to do things to understand, and I didn't have the privilege to do that. So it was like hard. I wouldn't say I wasn't studying. I was definitely studying, and my grades are great. but I felt like I still could do more in a classroom setting. Yeah.
Okay. What are you studying, both of you?
I'm studying international relations.
And me, business economics.
Okay. So how has been the relationship with your classmate, if any, actually?
There's like none. I think that for the few people that I really have relationships with in my classes are the people that I knew from before, from in-person classes. So people that I basically already had relationships with. And from the classes, you can kind of make friends, but only in the classes where you have a group project. So you're kind of forced to work with people for an extended amount of time outside of the classroom. And even then, it's so much harder to organize group projects because you have to find. And I think that the motivation to interact with other classmates is just not there like it was before when we were actually in person and we sat next to each other in class and we had the like we could kind of see people's personalities also completely differently because we see how students interact with the teacher as well, one-to-one, how they respond to questions in class. It's kind of a different atmosphere in Zoom, especially because you can use the chat function. So some people you never even hear their voice, and there just isn't that level of human interaction at all. Yeah.
In regard of the quality of the courses, obviously you have been both at school for one semester when the pandemic started. So do you see a major difference between now and then in terms of quality, actually, the schooling that you...
For me, I see a big difference because there are a lot of professors which courses I took before the pandemic, and then I took like another one of their classes after the pandemic. So I knew their teaching style in the classroom, and I knew what type of interaction they like to have with students, and then I saw that change with the Zoom classes. So for example, there's this class that I'm taking right now, which is like leadership and organization management, something like that. And I took this professor's classes before. And I can tell that he really tries to make us interact by putting us into like breakout rooms where we can discuss the topics and the leadership cases of different leaders each week. But it's so difficult because when you're in those breakout rooms, the teacher doesn't like, he cannot, or they cannot supervise because we're all in different rooms at the same time. So a lot of the times we're not productive, or some students don't speak at all in the breakout rooms, or the atmosphere is just not very interactive, or I don't know. It's just very hard for the teacher to uh, make us interact, even though that is their goal. And so I even emailed that professor to ask like if they wanted to know, you know, what other methods that could help to make us interact more, because I just didn't feel that breakout rooms were effective, because it was like putting us in a different room while the teacher is in this room, and then in this room nothing is happening, we're not actually learning anything. And it kind of puts pressure on those students who are really interested in the courses to lead the entire conversation as if they're the teacher themselves. And I just didn't feel like that was fair. But it's so complicated because I'm sure the teacher feels just as frustrated as the students do. So it's kind of like a losing battle in a way.
And what about you, Aisha? I did study international relation when I was in uni, and you studying international relation. I guess that one of the most important things for me was actually the interaction with people coming from all around the world, the different perspective. How does it affect what you think you were supposed to learn or you were wishing to learn?
In terms of the quality of classes, I'm a little bit different than T because all the classes that I have taken over the pandemic are with new professors, so I really didn't know what type of interaction that they preferred. But I
Yeah.
can say the same. I can say the same. Being in the field of IR, it would really much accommodate me to know people, like to get that interaction like in real life, and I didn't really get to have that. So yeah.
Oh. You're already both in third year, so I guess that you were supposed to do internship at least study abroad. How does it work for you in that regard?
It's
It has
still,
been hard.
I'm still a
Like,
little bit unsure because I think we've been living in uncertainty, knowing that we don't really know when this is going to end. So of course it's taken a toll on our future. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think
And sorry,
hmm? I
sorry,
was Yeah, I was gonna say that I talked to a lot of students in not only our year, but also for the seniors. I think it's been even worse because I think there's a batch that just graduated this fall, and they've had a lot of hard time going into the job market at a critical time like this, where there's a lot of unemployment wherever you are, and a lot of them are stuck in positions that they weren't initially interested in, kind of just finding the first thing available because of the urgency of this situation and how the world has changed. And that kind of scares me as well, even though I still have a bit more hope that next year will be different. But yeah, I think it's a very scary situation, especially for the third and fourth year students.
okay. In that regard, do you think that you both entering your last year at uni, do you think that is going to be a pressure for you to go directly to grad school instead of going to the job market regarding that the new variant and the situation that we all facing basically?
I mean, I've seen it because from my high school, a lot of people have already graduated from their respective universities, and a lot of them have decided to move on to grad school, not because they necessarily want to go to grad school, but because the job market is so difficult, especially those who graduated in Europe. They told me that they were facing a lot of difficulties, and also there's kind of a difference there because in Japan or in most countries in Asia, there isn't that pressure around getting a master's or getting a graduate degree. But perhaps with the impact of COVID on the job market, even in Japan, there will be some type of shift in that sense. I can see it maybe coming in the future next year or the year following.
You're both living different like student experience now. You're both at the same uni, but because of the travel ban, Aisha, you now in
still here.
Indonesia, and Tiyi is still in Japan while she's originally from France. How are you dealing with that? What is your take on the situation in that regard?
I think that, of course, I have to stay patient, knowing that it did add to my stress because I was ready to go this month, and then just a couple of days ago they put out that travel ban. So, of course,
Yes.
I was like, I had to be a little bit more patient. But I really do hope they lift the ban so I can at least kind of get settled into the, like, school can start again. At least I can be in Japan. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think for
The,
me, mm,
Go ahead, sorry.
I think for me, my mindset is getting a little bit better as the time goes by. When it first started in 2020, I had just moved out of the school dorms. So I feel like I was entering a new phase of my life. And then as soon as I was looking forward to something, then COVID hit. And it was like, okay, no human interaction. So I had to really take some time to myself and learn how to stay motivated without having people around me. And because I'm kind of an extrovert, it was a bit difficult to adjust to that change in lifestyle. And it was really easy to become negative, especially because you constantly hear about it on the news. So it's like this revolving thing around your life, and you know that you can't do anything about it. So I think that feelings of helplessness were the worst. But as this year started and I kind of got used to it, I think as a lot of people did, it became a lot easier to handle. I think now the only thing that is hard about it and that a lot of foreign students deal with, even like in the United States, is not being able to go back home as often as I used to. And at before, because I went to boarding school, I didn't really feel the impact of that. But as the time that I spend away from home gets longer and longer, I start to miss it more. So that has been sad. But in terms of how it's impacting my education, I think that the impact is lessening definitely as I get used to it, as professors get used to it, as really everyone adjusts to this new world essentially.
So what kind of strategy you both put in place to actually cope? You mentioned stress, the isolation, be by yourself, and what kind of strategy you actually use? Because I think that you are the first generation actually living. It was my nephew. The first generation actually dealing with the situation. So.
I think our
Um,
podcast one.
yeah. It's like our little project on the side. And I guess what T said, knowing that we are alone most of the time, having tea and like having to be able to call my friends, it's a lot for me. Like it helps a lot. So
Mm. Can you tell us a little bit more about that podcast and especially what are the topics that you touching upon and how does it help you to deal with the current situation?
Mhm.
we do self-help topics mostly, and we just put out an episode about this whole roundup of 2021. And I think it helps me in a way that I get to also help people, knowing that there are listeners. And in a way, it's kind of therapy because I get to talk about my feelings. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I
And
think
what are
that
the type of topics you actually touch on?
we touch on everything really, and I think that's the beauty of it is we don't try to restrict it to one idea. A lot of the podcasts that I was an avid podcast listener before I started the podcast, and I started it right during quarantine actually. I started it in March 2020, and it was just really random. Like I woke up one day and I was like, I've been thinking about the idea of having a podcast for years. Like I love listening to podcasts, and I think that uh it's a way to get an insight into someone's life and also at the same time learn more about yourself and your life. And I thought to myself, I love talking. Like, I love talking to people. I love talking to myself, even. And so I just randomly started it and started talking about my experience quarantining alone in Japan. And then after that, about a couple months into it, I asked Aisha to join me because I feel like the conversation can only be strengthened by having someone else and someone else with completely different experiences than me who can add to, the insights that we have about life. So we talk about love, relationships, school, life after graduation. We've interviewed some people, talked about um, LGBTQ issues, racism, feminism, everything basically. And I think that our generation, especially, we're a lot more open than people used to be. And so through platforms like this and being vulnerable, we can also help other people. Oops, I
Mm.
think Aisha's internet, but she'll
I'm
come
going
back.
to add her when she come back.
So yeah,
Mm.
that's basically the philosophy behind Ice Black. And the idea was just to originally I had planned to have it with interviews in person. So the idea was to sit down with a black coffee. That's why I called it Ice Black. But unfortunately, we have never had an in-person recorded podcast for now, but hopefully after COVID we will.
What I noticed is just before the pandemic started, it was it was a situation where youth around the world, especially in the US, were getting more and more motivated. Welcome back. Were more motivated to get engaged. And how does it stop? And with the pandemic, did you notice a shift in this engagement, especially within I think that some movements were LGBTQ, but they were also linked with social issue in general, climate change. So.
Oh, completely no. I think that it has gotten a lot bigger, actually. And I think that COVID has really shown us where our true priorities lie. I mean, we've had the whole Black Lives Matter movement. We've had, uh, with the whole Asian Americans and even Asians in Europe getting attacked. We've had protests regarding that. We've had climate change protests over the past year. We've had protests about the reproductive change and all of that, reproductive rights. So I don't think it has stopped. I think it has only made us stronger in the sense that we actually do believe in all of these human rights. And now that our lives are in danger, you know, we feel even more connected to those ideas. I think, at least for me, I think, I don't know why, but I feel even more strongly about certain social issues now that I've been stuck at home and I had to experience life in a different way. Because technically now the only communities that we live in are on the internet. And because a lot of these social movements are powered by social media, now is an even better time to, you know, start building those communities and gathering people and protesting for what we want, essentially.
And how do you build those community? I can see that you already started having Aisha in Indonesia, you in Tokyo, but how are you linked with people from your generation?
I think it's so difficult because in a way I can say that it's easy to build these communities because for me, for example, I have my organization Hogo Women, which is about educating youth about gender-based discrimination. And the way that I found my members is kind of by talking to people, building relationships with them. And sometimes you don't even know that someone could be interested in something like this, and it kind of just slips out. And then you instantly have someone who could be on your team, in your community. But at the same time, I think it takes a special type of person to be able to find those people who are interested in social change and who are interested in like making an impact on the world, because social media can be a very powerful tool, but I can also say that a lot of our generation that is on social media is just focused on, you know, looking good or whatever celebrity is trending right now. So it's really about finding your tribe. A lot of people, for example, say that like Twitter is negative or TikTok is not a good influence or whatever. But if I had something to say to parents, for example, I would say that you can also find some of the best people on those social media platforms. You just have to look for it. I actually, one of the people who was on our podcast is a student at Tokyo University Graduate School. And she's a feminist activist, and I found her through her TikToks, and I contacted her. So it's very easy to actually build a community if you look for it. But you have to have the motivation to actually do it. You can't just expect people to find you. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. You won't find your community just by waiting around.
Aisha, I have a question. You living in Indonesia right now, do you think that the context of the political context, the social context of Indonesia is actually preventing you to go as far as you want or you wish in regard of your activism?
That's interesting because Indonesia is pretty much we're a very religious based country. That's why I can kind of see a lot of people, especially among my generation, they find it hard to be themselves. So it actually really is saddening, and I really do hope that my generation can at least change that. And yeah.
Okay. Have you noticed, because I have a lot of Indonesian friends who are much older than you, and discussing with them and see them being parents, because we both have, we have children around the same age as you, and they pretty much open with their children. But does it translate when you look at the community or the country in general? For example, in school or in the street, in regard, for example, LGBTQ community, are they more accepted?
Among my group of friends here, I think I can kind of see that their parents are, some of their parents are accepting, but some have not. And I can kind of understand, because it can kind of be a hard thing for them, especially coming from my country, where the morals are very much there. So
yeah. And in regard of the pandemic, does that create more isolation for people seeking for answers, seeking for understanding, or even questioning themselves, not knowing exactly what they are or what they wish to be?
Yes, but at the same time, I do feel like because they're at home most of the time, they would turn to social media. And because of what she said, social media has definitely helped them a lot. And I can kind of see that some of my friends have found their own communities as well, living in Indonesia, you know, going through the same process. So it can kind of be, being home has helped in a way. So.
Okay. Oh, this is interesting. And in regard of your podcast, what are you wishing to do? Like, I think that the travel ban is like even worsening in the following weeks and months. So your plans are just changed because Japan has just decided to close its border, even to its own citizen. So what are your plans for both of you? Or can you actually make plans? This is also one of the issues, actually.
Well, until we meet each other, we're still going to conduct Zooms, but I would rather much do it in real life with her. So we can have that human connection.
I think we have so many ideas, and even I remember at the end of 2020, we had these plans to meet up in Japan in the beginning of 2021 and start interviewing people in real life, even people from our school, but that was all impossible. But we still have a lot of ideas. I think the big difficulty is in staying consistent when we have, you know, a bit of a time difference and we have to manage our schedules without the luxury of meeting each other every day and not having to rely on Zoom meetings to record. So that's a big difficulty. And even for the sound quality of our podcast, it would be so much better if we were in person. But I would still rather have a co-host and have the sound quality be a little bit lower than do it myself and have the sound quality be better, because I know that the content is more important than the sound. So yeah.
Who is your audience? Have you been able to actually interact with them? Do you know approximately who's listening to you? Where are they? And what are they doing, basically?
Yes, we have
my friends. Sorry.
Oh, your friends are listening?
My friends are big fans of Ice Black, and they've also have inputted. They've said I really enjoy this one topic. You should keep on going. You know, blah 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 blah. So it's definitely helped
Oh,
knowing that my friends are big fans of Ice Black.
oh, great.
We have a few listeners from our university, our friends, our circles, and even I think some people from my high school listen as well. And from the analytics, at least, we reach a lot of countries. I think we both have very international friend
Audience.
groups, so
Right,
that's
right.
definitely why, like United States, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, France, obviously. And then in terms of the age range, it's mostly 18 to 23, 25. I think we have more female listeners than male listeners. And yeah, that's pretty much how the analytics go. And that's pretty much the audience that we were aiming for, especially in terms
Mm-hmm.
of age. We want to be relatable to people in their late teens to early 20s because I think uh, our experiences can be more relatable for those age ranges. And hopefully it can help them to grow and to be a little bit more vulnerable and to be like better communicators. I think those are the biggest things that we struggle with in our generation. So I think that's what we put forward in every episode, whether it's about friendship or even just something random that we thought was funny. We always stress, how we can grow as people.
Mm. Coming both from two different backgrounds, obviously, what are you both bringing to that podcast?
Experiences. I think knowing that T and I are the same age, we did have different experiences, and I think the podcast really did bring us together. Knowing that I learned from her and she can learn from me, and our audience learns from both of us. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a variety of things from our personalities, not just our experiences, that makes it special. Like, I'm a bit like brutally honest, and Aisha's very funny. She's very bright, very calm and collected. She's a great listener. Like, all of these things add, and it's not like if we were doing the podcast in the like I was just doing my podcast alone or Aisha was just doing her podcast alone, I don't think it would work the same way. It would still be successful, but I think it's our chemistry that makes the podcast so great because we don't really hide anything from each other. So because we're so comfortable with each other, I think that the audience finds it easy to feel comfortable listening to it. At least that's what I hope. So yeah.
Does the topic now are in like I don't know inspired by the pandemic in somehow or it's just random?
Definitely inspired by the pandemic to some degree. I think that our topic ideas come from our personal experiences. So, for example, let's say I have this certain experience with a friend or a conversation with a friend, and I think of an idea or I learn a psychological lesson from that, then immediately I'll text Lisa and be like, oh, we should do this topic next time you
yeah.
record. And then that's how it goes. So obviously our experiences have been shaped by COVID, so definitely there are some topics that are surrounding COVID, or the topic is kind of, we mention some experiences where COVID comes in. Yeah, but we try not to make it too COVID focused because we want it to be a place where people can relax and forget about like everyday stresses. There's already a lot of that, so yeah.
Mm. And in that regard, so what are the outside the podcast as a student? How are you? What is your social life look like?
Um, I
If
think
any, I don't know if you actually have one now. How is it in Indonesia now or in Tokyo? What can you and what can't you do? Do you have like some classes that you still can go to uni, or do you have distant learning only?
For in Japan, if you're in Japan, for our university, we are allowed to go to classes in person. It's like hybrid, so you can do it from home or you can go to school. Most students choose to stay at home, and the university legally cannot like forbid us from staying home because that is our personal safety reasons, I guess. And I think I went to about 2 classes in person, and the rest I've stayed at home. But there's reasoning behind that because even if I were to go to school, there would be like 5 students in each class. So really, I don't get that value either way of in-person classes because there would be more classmates online than in person. So it's kind of difficult because the teacher is in person teaching to those 5 students that decided to go. And usually it's the students that live close to the school. So it's kind of convenient for them, or they don't really find it difficult. For the students who live far in the Tokyo area, usually they don't go to school because it's just easier to stay home and take classes from home. So the teacher divides their time between the people in person and online. So they'll have their computer in front of them teaching Zoom, and then the classroom right there. So yeah.
And what about you then, Aisha?
Well, as far as my social life goes, I think before the pandemic, I was very much an extrovert. I loved going out. I loved seeing my friends. I loved having a lot of people around me. But I think one of the big differences that I've just discovered during this pandemic is that I actually do like staying home, and I would rather
Mm.
Aisha, I think you're covering your mic because we can't hear.
sorry. Sorry. But yeah, I've discovered that I actually do like staying home, and I do like being by myself and not so out and about as I was before. So
Yeah, me too.
I would have thought that with your university allowing you to be able to go to classes, you will have more students actually going.
I thought so too. In the beginning, I was actually really excited to go back to school, but once I realized that no one else was coming, or there were very few other students that were coming, it was hard to stay motivated to get up and take the train to go to class when I could just open my laptop. And I think that it's also the fact that, so our university is an international school, so it's separated into 2 departments. We have the E track, which is where the international students study, and the J track, which is where the Japanese students study. And obviously, we could take classes at each other's departments if we have the acquired language level. So most of the Japanese students go to their classes in person. I don't know if it's just Japanese culture or they're just used to it. So most of them do that. And then a lot of the E-Track students are stuck in their respective countries, like Aisha, for example. So either way, the classes would be significantly emptier for E-Track, even if everybody in the E-Track who was still in Japan showed up to class. It would be, let's say, 1/4 of the class would still be missing. So I think that's one of the big reasons why the classes are not very full right now.
Okay. Aisha, have you thought about transferring to an Indonesian university?
not at all, actually.
Why?
I think I really like the school. I really like the uni in Tokyo. And even though if I did go to Indonesia, I wouldn't have to live in that uncertainty of knowing that when am I going to leave and like stuff like that. But then again, I don't think the experiences and people I would have met would have been the same, since like they're all in Indo, and going to an international school in Tokyo, it would accommodate me in that way.
Okay. Interesting. And in that regard, a lot of questions have been raised by some students according to the tuition, actually, because most of the classes are now online. So does it worth the price?
Well, I think at first students were really angered knowing that T, what was it that fee?
We have a fee within the tuition. There's a fee which is like a utilities or accommodation
Yeah,
fee.
yeah,
Basically, the
facilities
school, like
fee.
the desk, the chair, a fee that
Mm-hmm.
includes things like that. And there was actually a petition made by a Japanese student, which is rare,
Yeah, I was like,
asking the school to remove that fee from the tuition bill. So there was a lot of outrage, and I can understand it. I did understand it in the beginning, but at the same time, I think that it's so difficult to change things like that that were constructed with a certain educational system in mind. Especially in Japan, those things are so rigid. These systems are so rigid. And there also is a fee, I guess, for teachers having to adapt to this situation and having to learn how to use Zoom equipment, the school providing the new whatever digital equipment they need to make sure that those hybrid classes are happening. And since our school is still technically open, I did understand why they would have asked us to pay that fee. But because of the amount of economic impact that Japan suffered during especially last year during COVID, I also can definitely understand why some students didn't feel like they should have to pay that. And a lot of people lost their jobs in Japan, especially a lot of students, because in Japan, most students have part-time jobs, and that is how they, live their student life. So it was a bit inconsiderate of the school, but it's also something that, we didn't really have a choice.
Mm-hmm. And in regard of how institutions, schools in general, administrator, teacher, how do you think they actually handle the situation in Japan, in your specific school, or even in Indonesia? Do you think that they were up to the task, or they did what they were just improvising? From your perspective, what can you say? What did you see or feel or felt?
I think they
I
were
think,
overwhelmed.
yeah,
I
it was
think
very
that,
much from, sorry.
no,
Go,
go ahead.
Aisha.
Okay. I think like from both ends, we were both frustrated at the same thing. So it could kind of create that, like, we're just, everybody's overwhelmed. So they did what they could. I know that. And I guess us students, we were just trying to know what is going on. So, yeah.
Mm.
It's so difficult, especially in an international school, because there are like two big offices in our school. For example, we have the IDO, which handles everything regarding international student administration, and we have an academic affairs office that handles all the school, the majors, the departments, blah, blah, blah. And so it was their responsibilities to like inform us if there was a travel ban, what are our requirements regarding COVID, PCR test availabilities, vaccine information, for example. And a lot of times they did help with that, but sometimes I felt like there was information lacking, especially for me because I speak Japanese, so I can access like the national news. But a lot of the students at our school, the international students, don't speak Japanese. So it's very hard for them to access the information, and they need the school to be like very specific and be, basically emailing them the news all the time so that they can actually be educated and be safe. And that's the main idea that I think they were kind of missing, is that they were just kind of doing the bare minimum, I think, in that sense. And it was very dangerous, I feel, because sometimes I feel like I would be saying some information, for example, about the state of emergency, which is kind of Japan's version of the lockdown. And then I felt like the international students that I was talking to were not on the same level of information as Japanese students at all. And I felt like that just wasn't fair, and a bit of it was a bit worrying in a way, because like these people's parents are sometimes halfway across the world. Some exchange students, they were from like United States, Europe, and other students were from all over Asia. So it's like they don't really know what they're getting themselves into, and they have little support from the school. So that was definitely worrying in terms of the administration's handling of the situation.
Mhm. Hearing you, there is one question that I'm thinking about. It's what about the mental health of student then during this period? Like you were planning to go on vacation, Aisha, you were planning to go back to Japan, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden, your plan change again because of the new travel ban. You don't know when they are going to lift it, and it's going to be your last year. How are you handling in terms of your mental health? And I know that in Japan it's already difficult to talk about mental health. You have, even for Japanese students, you have a lot of suicide, a lot of issue in that regard. What can you say? How are you coping? What have been done? What you personally, the strategy that you're putting in place?
It's difficult.
I
Mm-hmm.
think one thing that has definitely helped me was knowing that I do have friends that care about me, and of course I care about them. Turning to them in times when I do need them definitely has helped me, especially during this tough time. I know everybody's very stressed considering that a lot of their plans have changed. So turning
Mm-hmm.
to somebody really did help me.
Hmm. I think that for me, especially living in Japan, the collective mindset is very fearful. So it was difficult to feel like kind of everyone around me was living in a state of constant anxiety. So I also kind of succumbed to that. And yeah, I think in terms of, I changed mindset recently, but for the past few weeks, I think that I just had little hope for the coming year, because it feels like we've been constantly in this state for years, and I just couldn't imagine enjoying my senior year being in this situation. But I also know that it's all about mindset, and if I enter the year with a positive note, I can make any experience positive. It's really all about within and not about the exterior. COVID could be happening and I could still have an enjoyable time, but it's difficult to manage your mental health when you all you see, especially in the media, is negative. So I think it's all about controlling your consumption. If you consume a lot of negativity, then obviously you'll become negative. So I'm trying to become more mindful of that, and definitely, like Aisha said, relying on people more. That's something that I think I struggled with before COVID, because I felt like it was easy to not rely on that many people when the world wasn't in shambles. But now that it's the case, I feel like community is even more important, and relying on your community is even more important. So I'm definitely trying to do that more. And that's one of my main ideas for the coming year.
And how are you building community in that regard?
Well, you mentioned social life. So before, oh my God, my social life was just non-existent. Like Aisha said, our friend group, we used to have these outings, or we would hang out together all the time after classes, after school in our freshman year. And then after COVID hit, we were all separated in different countries, different cities. I moved away a bit farther from the university, and I spent a lot of time alone. A lot. I think I even spent like a whole month without seeing someone, except for school, like online classes. But I don't consider that an interaction really. So I could have spent like a month without speaking to someone face to face, really. And so I think that I lacked that sense of community. Even if I talked to my friends on Zoom or on FaceTime or whatever, it was not the same. So this year we kind of forced ourselves to make these self-care days or girl days, and we go out on the weekends hiking or to museums, galleries, and things like that. And it's actually crazy because when quarantine started, I did not think that I liked being isolated at all. I hated it. But I think that isolation is a bit addictive in a way. I think even
Mm.
Aisha struggled with this. Like sometimes you would be at home and your friends would invite you to go somewhere during the last year and you would just be like, no, just because I don't know. It's like once we got used to being alone after this COVID hit, it was so much easier to just keep being alone all the time. Now that all of our responsibilities are on this laptop, basically, or on this phone, and it really almost became a chore to have to go out and interact with people. And for people who are really social like us, it almost seems unimaginable. But because we know that we can always interact with people online, it's like it doesn't feel that important. But now I'm really like forcing myself to go out and interact with people in the real world, because I feel like that was what was standing in between me having better mental health in this
It's a
situation.
bit worrisome to listen to both of you saying that you both actually now really enjoy being by yourself.
Hello.
And I'm just wondering what will be this generation at work, and does it like what is the perspective for the future for all communities in general if basically youth get to be by themselves? So what kind of community are we building?
I think it's very worrisome. I think that, I mean, I look at myself as an example, and I get worried because I'm someone who thrives on communication, yet I still feel like I am going more and more into myself every day. And it's difficult because, for example, I'm an intern at this company, and all of our interactions are through Zoom or these chat. I think I met my coworkers and my boss once only, and I've been working there for almost 3 months. So it's just interesting because you will never get to know someone's real personality throughout the internet, no matter how open and authentic you are. And I think that to some degree I am, even on my social media platforms. I think that someone who looks at my Instagram, they will not know me. They will know me to a certain extent, you know? So I can build community with people who are somewhat similar to me or somewhat similar to the image that I portray on my social media, but it will not be the same as me meeting someone organically and befriending them in person at all. That is
Mm.
completely different for sure. And I definitely worry because now that social media becomes our main mode of communication for our generation, the risk is that because we portray ourselves a bit differently on social media, our interactions are inherently superficial. Like we're not
Mm.
interacting with each other, we're interacting with profiles. And I think I'm seeing that trend a lot more and more. Like it's very strange. It's like, let's say my Twitter is at official Tiyi and Aisha. Like you won't know me, Tiyi and Aisha. You'll just know at official Tiyi and Aisha and what type of posts I write. And that's the kind of culture that Gen Z is essentially. I think that there is still hope. I mean, hope that COVID will go away soon and that especially younger generation, the kids who are in middle school now and high school will be able to experience a different world. But it's going to be difficult because we're not
Mm.
open, we're not good communicators, we're not, because we're not trained to, and practice
Mm.
makes perfect. and we're not talking to people. So of course that's a skill, you know. Communication is a skill, writing is a skill, public speaking is a skill. And the more we don't practice these skills, the more our generation is like, you know, hindered in those areas. So
yeah, I don't get that. And my question was for Aisha. Now that you have been outside Japan like for nearly 2 years now, and you are supposed to be an international student in Japan, do you really think that you're actually getting a Japanese degree? You know what I mean? I used to study in Japan, so I know what the student life in Japan was, and knowing that you for the last 2 years you have been like basically homeschooled because of the travel ban. So my idea is she really a graduate from a Japanese university? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. I think like I don't think I'm getting the experiences that I signed up for, right?
Yes.
But again, this is something very much out of our control, and
Yes.
all I can do is just pray that it ends
Mm.
quickly.
Mm. And in regard of the field in which you're studying, IR, what are the complaints of a student or the worries of a student in that regard in terms of career? Because I guess that you had an idea of what you want to do after graduating and maybe work for an international organization and maybe outside in Indonesia. And now looking at things, or things are going, I guess it's going to be a little more difficult.
I think I know for a fact that for one of my classes, we were planning to do this debate thing, and I was actually in that class, but unfortunately, before I got to go back, the pandemic started. So we actually did the debate in class, and it was so weird for everybody. I knew that some of my teammates were kind of complaining that during times of rebuttal, like the connection was bad, so we couldn't really get what we wanted to study initially. So.
Do you plan, is it an incentive to change your major?
Actually, it was. I actually wanted to change to BE, to T's major.
Business I don't know what is that major. International business. Okay.
Yeah, I actually wanted to change to T's degree for the longest time, but I figured I could do that while I was in Japan, and now I'm still here. And I think it's too late for me to change in new ways since I'm coming into my 4th year. So.
Okay.
I think
Oh my God.
but there are classes that you have to take before you can change. So
yeah, I think it's too late. So.
Did a lot of students actually thought about changing their major because of the pandemic?
I know one of my friends wanted to because of the pandemic, and she was actually IR too. I think we were on the same page on that.
And what was your plan before pandemic?
In terms of?
In terms of schooling, maybe internship, study abroad, master degree, if any?
Oh, well, like I actually wanted to get an internship there was this opening for a teacher in a kindergarten to teach English. And I actually was really interested in that. But unfortunately, again, the pandemic started and I couldn't go back. And I think I was actually really looking forward to that. Yeah.
Okay. Have you thought about international agency in Indonesia?
I wanted to internship here in ASEAN.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. But during that time, they weren't opening because the pandemic, and they didn't want to accept. Yeah. So I couldn't get to do that.
Okay. And so what now? We're still waiting what the Japanese government is going to do. I know that a lot of students are protesting and families, obviously, and Japanese families actually are protesting this time. And do you think that the Prime Minister is going to change his mind?
Yes and no. I think they will find a compromise because the problem is in Japan, there is a big like line where here it's like Japanese citizens who are basically the majority, the big majority, even though it doesn't seem like that, are very against having foreigners in the country living here, etc. And majority of the, I don't know, like media propaganda is that COVID came from foreigners. So most Japanese people are kind of in, like, they are agreeing with this travel ban basically. And then there are foreigners or mixed Japanese people and Japanese people residing abroad who are obviously against it for so many reasons, but mostly that they just want to see their families. And it's like the worst time because it's Christmas and New Year's. So I think that they will be forced to come to a certain compromise, and I think that the compromise will be that they will let Japanese nationals in, but not foreign residents,
Right.
which is what
Okay.
we are. We're the outsiders.
I'm listening to you. Have you noticed any change in the way Japanese are seeing foreign students, for example?
Yes, it's worse. I think that Aisha might not notice it because obviously she is abroad, but I'm really lucky that I speak Japanese during this time because I can see that politics has played a big role in how this has all played out. Obviously internationally, but I can see it in Japan a lot. Like, I hear so many students, a lot of Southeast Asian students also tell me that they get like basically racially profiled or stared at if they don't wear their mask completely correctly or something. When I have actually seen a lot of Japanese people not wearing their mask in public transit or things like that. And there's a whole side, like almost alt-right Japanese side, which is not really portrayed in the media, at least the international media. And we have had like the same issues in Japan that they've had in the United States with people not wanting to wear the mask and people not believing in the vaccine and all of these things. But it's almost as if a foreigner does it, it is criticized. But if a Japanese person does it, it's accepted. And that's what I disagree with, because if we're going to have freedom of speech, it should be for everyone. Why are foreigners almost like criticized for everything that they do? One example, for example, is that what was it? There was this travel campaign last year. In the middle of the in the middle of the pandemic, the government created a travel campaign to boost up the tourism rates all around Japan. So it was like cheap Shinkansen, all of this stuff, and I think it was called Go To Travel. And after the campaign, obviously, the COVID rates rose because people were traveling all over the country. And then they made an advertisement on TV saying that foreigners are bringing COVID to Japan again. When it's
But we couldn't enter Japan.
Yeah, it was obvious that it was because of this travel campaign. I think that there is just a lack of common sense, and because a lot of Japanese people are not interested in politics, whatever the media shows, they automatically believe as true. And that's very, very dangerous. I think that our generation, I don't think that's the case. Our generation of Gen Z Japanese students are not really like that. I think that they're a slightly more free thinkers. It's almost like they don't even care about COVID, which is another type of danger. But it was mostly older generation Japanese people, which were very hard to deal with in terms of how they harass foreign students on the street and things like that. Luckily, I didn't personally experience it, but a lot of people experience it. And it makes the whole situation worse, especially in terms of mental health, because we don't feel welcome here. And I had this thinking of I want to move out of Japan a lot of times throughout the pandemic. And I think this is the main reason, because I never felt like this before. Although I've experienced racism and xenophobia in Japan, it was not to this rate. So
You
that's definitely sad.
My question, you nearly grew up in Japan. You spent all your high school in Japan, and this is the second time within history that Japan is actually forbidden its own citizens to go back to their own country. And historically, Japan has had difficult relationships with his neighbor Asian nationals. And when I used to live in Japan, I actually noticed that the bamboo ceiling was still really high, and that was difficult for especially women from Southeast Asia to get respect, even men. So how does this travel ban is actually linked with historical racism and social policy that have been seen in Japan, and how it's going to affect the like the attractiveness of Japanese university, because it was one of the issue. Japan wanted to have more international students, and if the pandemic is worsening the situation of foreign foreign students in Japan, how are they going to reach the level of international students that they were seeking prior to the pandemic?
That is the biggest issue going on in this country, I think. And honestly, the big problem is that there are three categories in Japan that are completely different in their ways of thinking. And that is impacting all of their policies, their immigrant policies, their immigration policies, education policies, economic policies. The government feels a certain way. Obviously, they see the aging population, they want to decrease it. They see that the education, they see that the economic level of Japan is not as powerful as it used to be, especially compared to nations like China. So they're trying to find all of these ways to combat that. And then there's the elder generation in Japan from, let's say, like 40s to 90 or even 100, because people live long here, where they still have this thinking from like World War II, which is like Japan is the best, and no matter what, like we can figure it out. It's almost like they're not seeing the world as it is currently, and they still think that Japan is the most attractive nation in Asia. And I think that that's the result of years of programming, essentially the propaganda telling them, patriotism over everything. And then there's the new generation who I think was told so many times how like scary the Japanese empire was, that they just don't even want to tune in with politics, because they don't want to become like their elders who are so hyper focused on how great Japan is that they almost are desensitized to politics and the real world. I even had to force my Japanese friends to vote last year, or the year before, I think it was, because they're just so uninterested in what's going on around the world and even in their own country. Most of them don't really think about the fact that the aging population is going to have a direct impact on them and their lives and their professional opportunities. They don't think about that because everything seems so far to them. They're removed from it all, like they're in their own little cages. And I think it's really going to be hard to see Japan as an attractive country, because the veil is being lifted, especially after the last Olympics that we had. Everyone was dissatisfied with the result. I mean, the government basically pushed it last minute, even though they knew that it was dangerous, simply because of the money. Like, they knew that they had already invested too much. The people were dissatisfied because they paid high taxes for this event to rebuild Japan's reputation and blah, blah, blah. And they could not do that, obviously. And there weren't even that many guests. I don't think I know one person who actually attended the Olympics. So it's just really, I think it's hard on the Japanese public because everyone is just either unsure or unaware. And I think those are
So, from your perspective as both foreign student, will you choose Japan for graduate school? Okay.
Well, I think it's not to be like if we can get more detailed, I don't think that it's just because of the living conditions and the political state of mind and the lack of openness and awareness in society. I would also say that graduate school is not even something that is promoted here, so obviously it wouldn't be my first choice, but definitely if the living conditions were better and if the politics of the country and the social aspects of the country were better, then that would be a incentive to even consider it as a third choice or fourth choice. I have never even considered it, so that speaks to how bad it is.
It's Aisha, you told me that you wanted to stay, you didn't want to transfer to a Indonesian university, even so you couldn't go back to Japan, but now you're pretty sure you don't want to be in graduate school in Japan. Which country are you considering in terms of maybe Indonesia this time, but which country are you thinking in terms of dealing with the pandemic and with foreign students have been maybe better than Japan?
I have family in Europe, in Amsterdam, so that might be a choice for me. I think I've only looked at schools in Europe or Australia, but I do have family in Australia as well, but I think I'm more leaning towards in Europe. So.
Okay. What about you, T?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think that Europe has this reputation for being really free, and I mean, coming from France, it's the complete opposite of Japan, and there are so many things that I could say about France that I dislike, but if it's one thing about it is that you can be yourself, and for the most part at least, and in a situation like this, I think it's so important to feel like you can talk to people, you can feel free, you know. That's something that in Japan I think we feel very restricted, like everything feels very rigid and formal, and that's something that is difficult to handle when you're already stressed about your health, you know. So I would say Europe is definitely a choice. I think United States, it's difficult because I've always seen it as there are a lot of opportunities for people, and so I always will consider it. But at the same time, there's also a lot of controversy regarding how they handle the COVID situation. So yeah, it's difficult.
What about another Asian country? Maybe Singapore is known to have really good school, South Korea as well.
Singapore has also been very, very restrictive. I mean, one of our best friends, Inka, is currently also stuck in Singapore. And I don't think it would be for me because I think that I would have experienced the same thing as I did in Japan, kind of similar to that. Like the idea of feeling very restricted through all these lockdowns. Yeah. But if the situation were to change, it could definitely be a good option.
Okay. Interesting that you see Europe as a space where you can actually be yourself. What is interesting while studying in Europe is the price as well, was pretty cheaper in comparison with other countries. So it can be an option in that regard. But do you think that the experience, like, are you going to lack something for your undergraduate? In regard, even in regard of content.
You mean comparing our undergraduate experience in Japan as to what we could have experienced in Europe?
I don't think so because you both know that I teach at uni in France. So we also, for me as a lecturer, I noticed that the level of involvement of students are dropped significantly, and they are less interested anyway. They look at excuses for not doing what they are supposed to do. So I think that the pandemic is showing a part of your generation that I really don't like. Is always a kind of selfish kind of generation, and always looking for excuse not to do what they are supposed to do. And there are some, I do notice that there have been mental health issues that has been raised because of the pandemic. But meanwhile, I think that some students are using it as an excuse not to do what they are supposed to do. This is, it's not that we're living in the stage of war. That situation has been imposed to all of us, including us in terms of lecturer. We're trying to do our best to actually give you the most that we can. But we notice that a lot of students, they just use many excuses not to do what they are supposed to do. And they will spend times connected and playing and TikToking or whatever, but not actually doing, I don't know if it's a term, but actually not working. And when you ask them, yeah, you are supposed to do that, I have some connection issues and blah, blah, blah. But you don't seem to have any connection issue when you are on TikTok, or I don't know, it's maybe me, but there have been, I don't know, lack of involvement and looking for excuse not to actually do what you are supposed to do. And I'm just wondering, does university make sense for your generation now? Because before that, some people were saying you can learn through experiences and all those things. So with COVID and what we're living now, does your generation still value education, or this pandemic is showing us that we need to change something?
I don't think so. I actually really, it's a question that I don't think any other educators have really thought about. And in the beginning, when you were describing how, I mean, you always talk to me about how your students are distracted and all of this and all of the things that you experience. And I always say, like, you know, their parents kind of raised them to be that way and not to hold them accountable and all of these things. And I think that obviously the parents play a role in teaching their kids the importance of education, the value of education, and how you're supposed to conduct yourself in front of the educator, why you should respect educators, etc. And I think that value isn't really taught in French families in comparison to Japan, for example, or most Asian countries. But at the same time, the experience that Asian students get isn't exactly great either. Like, a lot of them complain about how teachers are just simply lecturing and then they just take notes and they're not actually learning anything. I think it's a mix of, our generation has witnessed the rise of people succeeding in so many different manners that it's difficult to see education as the only option. Whereas, for example, in your generation, education was the main way that people got successful. It was very rare for someone to just get famous off of YouTube, or is like doesn't even exist, but there weren't other options. So I think that now that people are seeing that there are other options, it's easy to be distracted because you always feel like you can have a plan B. But the danger is that not everyone can be a social media influencer, or not everyone can be self-made. Not everyone can be successful without an education, because you have to be street smart and you need these connections, or you always need something that is either innate or is a privilege that you have. And I think that people are just not thinking about that. I think that that could be something to teach as well as an educator. I mean, for example, you talked to me about some students who have like exceptional talents, like they can do hair or nails, and those people could easily become very successful entrepreneurs, but we're not taught how to be entrepreneurs. We're not taught to do taxes. We're not taught how to like do things for ourselves. And so a lot of people who are not meant for school, or who are not book smart, or who don't for example, they may have ADHD or focus issues, where being in school for a long amount of years is just not viable for them.
So,
You know.
so if I get what you're saying, we need to adapt higher education in regard of what we have been observing or noticing with the pandemic.
In a way, yes. And I think especially in France, for some reason we have a lot of these different fields that you can go into and you can specialize in, even in high school. But there is a stigma around those fields. So students feel pressure to, for example, go into the scientific course, even though they're not good at it, just because their parents are forcing them to, when they could have taken like a specialized entrepreneurship course or a beauty course, and they could have started their business instead of being in school for 3 more years in class that they hate, where they're not going to focus, their grades are going to be horrible, and then it's going to be even harder to go from there. Because I've seen it a lot, even in the previous schools that I was in France, that sometimes it's just not their path. And I think it's difficult for professors to see that, because most professors come from highly educated families, so they don't see like that other path. I mean, even for you, like most people in our family have a lot of degrees, so it seems kind of strange for someone to succeed without a degree unless they're exceptionally talented. But because there are so many ways of getting an audience these days, it's actually very possible. But you still need to train yourself. And the problem is that students don't know how to train themselves.
So, Aisha, you were thinking about maybe changing your major due to pandemic, because IR is basically the experience, the studying experience, the learning experience that you were hoping you are not having it with distance learning. Looking at a master degree even in Europe, do you think that you are going to change the field in regard of maybe another pandemic, or a version of that pandemic is going to occur?
Now that I still don't know of. As of right now, I know that I'm very comfortable studying IR, so I might still just stay along the lines of IR, even if I go to graduate school.
Okay. Does the pandemic has affected girl students differently to boy students? Because I know that I listened to your podcast. You think kind of, I guess, I'm not sure, but you feminist, both of you. So I'm wondering. I'm wondering if, from your perspective, the pandemic is affecting girls differently, young girls differently from young boys, especially in regard to access to education.
Yes, I think. Not in my case, but I'm just now thinking about a story I heard. I know that in some students, the gender roles in their families are very defined. And so a lot of female students, for example, they have to do the cooking and the cleaning with their moms in the household. And so now that there was online school, for example, I heard that some female students had to take care of their sisters and brothers in the house while they had their own classes. They had to cook and clean in the day. And it's so difficult because I know that professors don't have time to manage every single person's home situation. But I think that was the hardest thing for students. And I think not so much for higher education, because most people live outside of the home or in dorms or somewhere. But for high school, I think that it was very difficult because once you get into high school, I feel like in a lot of countries, you're considered a woman. You're not considered a girl anymore. And so you have so many responsibilities, and a lot of girls are supporting their mothers almost as second mothers. And there's something that is called as the older sister syndrome. I think I heard about it on TikTok actually, where these older sisters in the families are almost like matriarchs because they have to hold the family together when the parents are not there, especially in big families or when they have a couple of brothers and sisters, and they have the pressure of doing the housework on top of their own schoolwork, and that's something that it must be really, really difficult.
Aisha, you went back home in Indonesia. Indonesia is not known as the most open country in regard to women rights. Have you noticed the same thing? Does the pandemic has worsened the situation of young girls, or you don't notice any changes?
I think it pretty much stayed the same because these morals of, like T said, women having to cook, having to clean, and men having to work, it's still pretty much the same. But then again, like T said, on top of that, they need to be able to get an education through the screen, basically. So it must be pretty difficult still.
Okay. No, thank you. It was really enlightening for me to know that what's happening in for your generation, and we are reaching the end of our lives. Do you have something you want to add, or maybe a question, a point that I didn't mention or didn't thought about?
Me?
I think I would just say, like, I know that as a professor, there are a completely different set of challenges that you face, and also as a parent, obviously, but it's so important to like be patient, even though I know that it's difficult when you have students who are not fulfilling their part of the agreement. Like your part is teaching them the content and their part is, learning from you, doing the assignments, everything. But sometimes you never know what the student is going through. Sometimes later on you will find out that they actually love that class, but they had a lot going on or something. So you never know, and it's never to put into question your teaching skills, because I know that you're a wonderful professor. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Aisha?
I think it's pretty much the same. Educators and students are both very frustrated at the same time. So I think understanding each other is the way.
What can we do? What can we do? What kind of tools you might advise us to use in regard of the situation and how things have changed with the pandemic?
I think for me personally, motivation is big. For me, the number one thing would be motivation, because
and can we better motivate our students then? What can you expect? Do you want us to DM you? I don't know. To create TikTok content. Actually, I was looking at one educator is like, and she was saying that your students are on TikTok. They're talking about issues that you thought they were not interested, and maybe you should go there and start the conversation with them. So I was okay. Maybe I need to be on TikTok as well.
That's true, actually. I think
Really?
it's just about communicating, and I think that sometimes you're frustrated with your students because they react completely different than you want them to react, but we see the world completely different than you do. Like, we live the world differently. We're constantly like even though I think that there's like for example us, we grew up in international schools, so we have that added advantage, but technically our entire generation is in one big international school, which is social media.
Mm.
Like you
That
can
is an interesting
literally,
perspective.
well, at least
Mm.
if you speak English, which is the language
Mm.
most use, or Spanish or Chinese on social media,
Mm.
it's so easy to connect with people and to actually learn. And I'm sure a lot of people would say that they have learned more from social media than from school, unfortunately. But um, there's always a way. Like one of my teachers, he asked us one day what we think about the class format, and I was like, it's almost the end of the semester and you're asking this now. I mean, I'm grateful that he did ask, but it's like, if
Is
he
it
had
in
asked
the
that,
beginning that we should ask?
yes, I definitely think so, because maybe they have interest in the course. They just don't like
Mm-hmm.
the way it's presented. For me, I love that course. It's one of the most interesting courses that I've ever taken in my college career. But the way that he would put us in these breakout rooms, I wasn't learning anything because I
Mm.
was the only one talking in the breakout room. So I had no connection. The point of the breakout room is that
Mm.
this student tells me their opinion, I learn from their opinion, then I say my opinion. But if there's no exchange, then there was
Mm.
no, and it was a waste of time.
Okay.
So I kindly asked him if there was another way, and now we do a whole class discussion
Mm.
where we actually get to hear everyone's opinion instead of the four people that we're in a group with, and it's so
Okay.
much better. So you never know what type of innovative ideas your students could have.
Okay. I really like the idea that one of the last guests in your both podcast, you met her through TikTok, and I was just okay. So it's interesting. So actually, there are interesting things on TikTok. So you think that is a tool that actually, as educator, we can use?
Yes, because it's, well, it's not face-to-face communication yet, but because it's video focused, there's still that sense of like closeness that you don't necessarily get from Instagram, where it's just pictures or infographics.
Mm.
Like you always say, for example, about my organization, that we should be more personal to reach people. And I was considering actually a TikTok because so many people get their information from TikTok, and it's that quick, like 1 minute format where you can easily digest an issue without feeling like, oh my God, like I just watched a 30-minute
Mm.
lecture about feminism and I still don't understand anything. Like you can get the key points, and it's still usually like humorous or fun or just engaging in the format that our generation likes, because we have very short attention spans. So we need the information to be quick and fun and like all of these things. And I do think that we're a bit high maintenance in that way. So I understand why
Okay.
education finds it hard.
Now you know.
We know, we know, but
We know.
yeah, that's just how we were raised, I
Mm.
guess.
Okay, interesting, interesting. So, in regard of that, what can we expect from you? Because we also learning from you, and now that a lot of students, just like you, have platforms where they express themselves, not only on classes that they're taking at school, but also on issue that you are actually teaching us in regard of, as for me, is LGBTQ and the issue of how to look at gender in the 21st century. I actually think that I learned a lot from your generation, and I think that there are a gap between your generation and my generation, and how can we better learn together. I listen to your podcast. I know that I'm not the target audience anyway, but I'm still listening to it. So, but how can we foster those spaces where we can actually exchange together?
Listening is the main thing listening to
Okay.
each other. Like for example, when we used to have conversations about trans issues, like you were a bit confused about it, and then slowly as we talked more, you did your own research and you actually understood like what trans people were going through, trans women, Black trans people especially. And so I think that there's this gap where a lot of adults feel as though because they are old, they are automatically smarter, which is not the case, because the world is constantly changing. So even if you have all the information for your generation, as the world is changing, the rights and the wrongs are changing. So for example, if 20 years ago, 20 years ago, it was like wrong to be gay in some places. Now it's not. It's just who you are. And we are just existing in these, you know, spaces. We don't have to, like, we don't have to adapt to whatever a country or religion tells us to be. And I think the beauty in our generation is the individuality that we have and the ways in which we are able to talk about almost anything in a lot of ways, which I think is missing from the older generations. Like so much is taboo and all of this is scary to talk about, when really the more we talk about it, the less complicated it's going to be for people to be themselves. And I think everyone can benefit from that.
And in that regard, can you both tell me if you have thought that now distance learning had made it safer to actually discuss some issue in classes? Because you're far, so was it easier to actually talk about certain issue? I know that if you're studying IR, there are a lot of topics that are actually going to tear down a classroom, because I used to study IR and we were like coming from 15 different countries, and some of the classes, I can tell you, there were battles at the end of the course. Nobody was talking to anyone. Like, African American. Does like learning from a distance made it safer to actually be easier to say what you want to say?
In a way, yes, but at the same time, I think me personally, I prefer it to be face to face, so they could. It's like no platforms, no, yeah.
Okay.
Well, for me, I didn't take many humanities classes, so I can't say. But there was one experience which I had, which was in the light of the Black Lives Matter movement. I had a reunion with my high school graduating class, where we had a very open discussion about anti-racism policies and the ways in which we addressed race in our international school. And I think it was interesting because I do definitely think that people were a lot more open to both listen and to be vulnerable, and to also like open up about their past mistakes when it comes to race and race rhetoric. So yeah, I do think that there is a bit of an easiness in being shielded by that laptop.
Being both minority students, have you noticed any difference in a way where you've been treated by your peers?
In uni, no.
I think because our school is majority Asian still, so yeah. I don't think there was.
But there are a lot of fights between Asian as well. Asian is not an identity. There are plenty of different cultural identities within Asia. And especially when you're living in Japan, or when you're studying in Japan, Japanese history with some of its neighbor has been more than controversial and difficult. And in regard of comfort woman, for example, and I don't like this term comfort woman actually, but there has been issue in some of my classes when I was studying in Japan between Asian students.
I think that would happen more within like between Japanese students and the like international Asian students. But then again, because we don't get a lot of chances to interact with them, I think that it's not that common for those fights to occur. Simply because most Japanese students are not like competent enough in English to be able to be in the classes that have those debates. So that would be interesting in another school. But I did see in the Black Lives Matter time, there were a lot of debates.
Sorry.
There were a lot of debates because our school has a lot of American students, white American students mostly, and so a lot of people. And I think I see this with love. A lot of Asian students are very uneducated about race outside of the Asian continent. And so there was a lot of educating that had to be done. And I also think that there is this white supremacy ideals in Asia where a lot of students simply believe that people deserve to be killed by the police because the police has a certain amount of power, and there is police brutality in a lot of Asian countries. So I understand that they grew up in countries where that was accepted. However, the implications of race within police violence is something that a lot of them were not educated about, I think.
There is one question, there is one question that has been which is raised about mental health when you go study abroad. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit? It's one of our guests, Rice. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name correctly. We did talk about it a little bit, but in regard of what you've been living, how about mental health again as a student with the pandemic? You are studying abroad. Aisha, you kind of in limbo for the moment because of the travel ban. And how is, I guess that is affecting you mentally, or because all this uncertainty, you were supposed to go back to Japan for your senior year. So how are you handling knowing that you're not even sure that you will be able to go back for your final year in Japan? So if you are not able to go back, that means that your degree, which is a Japanese degree, you actually stay only in Japan for one semester. And what does it mean for you? How are you processing that situation?
It is actually really scary knowing that there is a slight chance that I might not come back. And it's still stressing me right now, but I guess I do push myself a lot in terms of staying patient and knowing that I am well taken care of, and I know that along the way it's going to be decided. So
okay. And what about you, Tiyi? You have been abroad for quite some time. You were preparing yourself to go back to France, and you cannot because of the uncertainty. Now, even though I'm not sure that if you go out of Japan, you will be able to go back for your senior year. So you are going to be alone once again. So what do you think? What are your perspectives? How do you feel about it?
I think that the biggest conflicting idea is the idea that I want to study in a place where I feel like home. And for a long time, Japan did feel like home, or like a second home, because I did kind of grow up here. But because of the political implications of COVID and the amount of like public bashing of foreigners, I think that my mindset of Japan completely shifted to where I didn't feel like it was home anymore. And that is the biggest, that has taken the biggest toll on my mental health because, and also home is where the people you love are. And most of my, most of my friends and family are not in this country at this moment. So, of course, it's very difficult to stay grounded and stay motivated when you feel alone. And loneliness is something that I'm sure a lot of people experience. But because it was so sudden with COVID and it came at the time where I moved out to my first apartment, there is like a lot more emotional baggage behind that. So, it's definitely hard to handle, and I think that the only way that we can do it is if we're understanding with each other, students with each other, and professors with each other, and professors with students.
I have one question for you, Aisha, because your situation is really raising a lot of questions for me. One of the point of foreign students going to study in Japan is learning Japanese. Japanese is a very complex language, and especially that studying IR, I guess that you took a lot of Japanese courses. And not being in Japan, how does the fact that you're now studying, you have distance learning and your ability now to improve your Japanese language skills?
One of the main reasons why I got kind of anxious about going back was because about my Japanese. It's been a long time since I've actually spoken Japanese, and I know I'm not at T's level yet, but I can kind of carry I can kind of carry a conversation. But then again, I was actually planning to, over the course of the summer, before we go back into fourth year, first semester, I was actually planning on taking courses, like small, short, summer courses of Japanese. Yeah, but we don't know. I don't know.
And how are you handling, what are you doing in order for you to be able to maybe at least to keep up with your level of Japanese proficiency? You can actually speak with T.
I actually have never done that with her. But my sister, she is actually enrolled in a language school, a Japanese language school. And so she's actually a lot more advanced than I am, so I can practice my Japanese with her. It really does help knowing that she is in language school.
Okay. What about the podcast in Japanese? One episode of your podcast in Japanese. I'm waiting for that one. No.
That would be very difficult.
Yeah.
we can try.
Yeah, you can try. Or maybe a bilingual kind of. I guess that you already have some interview that were bilingual.
Yes.
That listened to some of them. So I was really happy to discuss with you. I don't know if you still have any input that you want to add to the conversation, or maybe someone has a question. Yeah. There are people who came and go, and
by the way, shout out to Sarah. I saw her in the comments, but Sarah is a member of my organization Hogo, so she does a lot of work regarding feminism and gender in Japan, and she's half Japanese, I think half Irish, so she also has a very like multicultural perspective, so it's always good. Yeah, say hey, Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. I have a lot of students who are named Sarah. It's like a generation name, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know what the future holds for all of us. In France, apparently, we will know tomorrow, but maybe school will close next week, at the end of this week, to be able to stop the spread of COVID within school. So I don't know how it's going to happen, but let's see. Let's see. Let's see. So in regard of what's happening in Japan, I'm not really hopeful, knowing how I perceive Japanese government policy in regard to this pandemic, and seeing what other countries are doing. I think that a lot of you are going to stay in the same situation, unfortunately, at least until March.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know, but I haven't seen so much new cases at school. It's like this last month we haven't had anything, but all of a sudden we have a lot of new cases, a lot of students that get contaminated, even those who have been vaccinated.
Yeah.
So I don't know I don't know at all what's happening, but I'm kind of a little bit worried. So I want you to stay safe, to do whatever you can to be happy. I know it's difficult. I can't even imagine being 21, being 20 with a pandemic. Honestly, you get it close.
Yeah.
That's a war zone, but I want you to be safe and try to enjoy life. You have families that love you. You have friends. You have social media. You have internet. We didn't have that. Just imagine my generation with an issue like that, with nothing. So it was the end of the world. So even so, the situation is not easy. I think that you're lucky to be able to still communicate, to still have that contact that you're having in your podcast and everything that you're doing for your peers. It's really something that I look like a really good initiative. I will go to TikTok. I don't have a TikTok account. So I don't know what's happening there. So I will check you out, girls, and all those activists from your generation, and maybe some of my students, who knows? Yes. So I was really happy that you agreed to have that small discussion with me. I wanted to understand how it was for you. You obviously extremely smart and beautiful and intelligent, so whatever. So it was really a pleasure for me.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
me.
for
It's an
having
honor to meet you.
us.
Thank you. Oh,
Thank
I
you
heard
so
so much about you, and it was the first time actually exchanging with you. So
Yeah.
because he's always, yes, my best friend, you know, and so I was like, okay.
Aw.
Oh my God.
So it was a pleasure to have you both, girls. So I'm really happy. Maybe we will have another live on another topic. So, but what are you planning for your podcast next?
We have a couple episode ideas about like hustle culture, all this.
Hustle
like,
culture. Oh la la.
we have a lot of like buzzwords in our generation, like hustle culture, social media, glowing up. Like we like to make these topics because they're things
I'm not from your generation,
everyone,
but those words actually make sense for me. I'm a huge fan of Cardi B, so I'm securing those bags and I'm hustling.
Yeah, we will talk about those things.
Okay, I will definitely tune in. I can learn 2 or 3 things you don't know.
Yes. Oh, Sarah said, please check out my TED Talk with TEDx TIU. I talk about consent. That's great. Okay.
That's great.
Definitely check that out. Actually, we can.
Please, can you send us the link, Sarah? I don't know if you actually register.
Yeah, but we will definitely share it on Hogo at least.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I will share it as well. So thank you guys. Have
Thank
a
you.
lovely
Thank you so
evening
much for
actually for
having
you.
us. Nice to meet
Bye.
Okay,
you.
Love
bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.